And g'day. Welcome to an interview with series where I interview authors. Today is an interview with Maurice Perkins. And I'm David Applegate, author of the book, The Boyhood of Cade, book one of the Empire of Elves. And welcome to Future Fantasy Empire. Today with me is Maurice Perkins, author of Revenge. This is his fifth book. Alrighty, Ben, introduce yourself to the audience.
Hi, good day. My name is Maurice Perkins, although I'm probably better known as Mo or Moz by my friends and followers on social media. A bit about me: I served for 6 years in the Royal Navy, worked for 10 years in a local authority in the public sector, and I spent the rest of my life in the private sector working in highways and transportation. I retired 4 years ago, but I dabble now and then on projects by request. I'm a father of 3 and a grandfather of 7.
And when did you realize you wanted to be a writer?
I started writing short stories at school, and I did have some short stories published in when I was in my 30s, but no great shakes. But I did get paid for them, which is quite nice. My writing career for many years was part of my business development work. So writing bids and tenders and selling our wares to the public sector. And it took the break of COVID in 2020, where the whole country locked down, for me to reignite my writing for sharing stories.
Yeah, that'll do it. I started much earlier myself.
Yeah, so 2020 was difficult, and I was trying to keep people engaged. I was just telling jokes and funny stories on Facebook, and it was a friend of a friend said, "You tell funny stories. If you ever wrote a book, I'd buy it." And it didn't cross my mind to do that until I kind of got those encouraging noises, and that's what I did.
Yeah, England is historically the birthplace of the comedic tale.
Well, we tried. I try and be funny.
You try your best. English comedy.
English comedy.
Love myself some good English comedy. So tell us more about your books. You mentioned you got 5.
Yeah, 5 books. So if we go in reverse, and the kind of the reason we're here is to talk about revenge. It's a novel based on an incident I witnessed some time ago, and I just took that incident to another level, well, quite a few levels really. Kind of old men with ex-military background, dormant skills, and they kind of get stumble into a gang turf war, which has quite disastrous consequences for all and sundry. I used, unusually, real people as characters, but I added skills to them that they don't really have, but those individuals can recognize their personas, and because I know them, it enabled me to write their idiosyncrasies into the book. So it helped me form some platforms for humor, which hopefully the readers can accept. But I've created some quite humorous dialogue, and they also acted as my initial beta readers.
Some mockery, some idiosyncrasies, some malice. We all have a good laugh sometimes.
Yeah,
whether it be friendly.
And it's that kind of banter. So if I go back to 2020 during COVID, and I was trying to share some of my personal stories, which are mainly humorous, but some quite difficult situations that had a funny ending, sometimes a sad ending, and I was encouraged to document them. So that's how I started to write my first 3 books, which were essentially my life story told by way of a series of funny stories. And I wanted to do that primarily because my dad's 90 now, and not everybody's heard his stories. And the only people who will ever hear his stories is when he's speaking them. And when he's gone, then his stories will only last for a period of time with those of us who are left. And I wanted to actually document my stories so my grandchildren would know a little bit more fella that sits in the corner of the room, grumbling into his tea in his sofa. And I hopefully that then they can read those stories long after I've lost my compass mentis to be able to regale them. And that was the reason why I did it. And I ended up writing 3 books for my grandchildren, and I thought I might sell some copies to friends and family, and was quite bowled over. I mean, really bowled over by how well they were taken by people I've never met. Sold around 2,000 copies of my memoirs, which is just, I'm an ordinary person who's done some perhaps extraordinary things.
Yeah, because 2000 is, as you may or may not have heard, is the benchmark of success for an author, for a writer to say, I'm an author, 2,000 copies, 10,000 is considered a bestseller. And yet here we are with multi-millionaire authors, but most of their money isn't from their book. It's from the merchandise and the rights.
And to be fair, I've set the price of my books at a quite modest level, so I'm never going to make a lot of money out of it. That's
same.
And it's not why I wrote them. The memoirs were for the kids. I wanted them to hear my story in my words, if that makes sense, rather than somebody else telling the story.
Do you have a preparation process?
Yes. I do a straw plan. So one of the things I've got on today is I've got some elements of a straw plan. So I write a straw plan, and I write it out as a spreadsheet, and it sits on my wall facing me here. And then I key into that set piece scenes that I want to write. I then describe the characters, what those characters have got, strengths, weaknesses, where they fit in, and then that gives me the basis for the story.
A military operation with intelligence.
Yes, and it doesn't say that way. I amend it, and so and I reach a certain point and think that doesn't work. The character doesn't work, or the plot doesn't work, and I'll go back. So it's never it's not a final thing. The straw plan to me is a moving feast, and it will always alter.
It's a living document.
It is. I mean, just going back to the other book I wrote called Quest, and it's a survival story, and it was something that was bouncing around in my head for a long time. What would you do if? What would you do if there was no electricity? What would you do if there was no water? What would you do if there was no gas? What would you do if there's no food in the shops and everybody was fighting for the last bits of food? What happens if, in the middle of all that, somebody decides to start a world war? And where do you end up? Well, you end up with very few people left on the planet. And that's what Quest is about. Now, to write that, I had to give myself some chronology, and I had to, again, describe the characters and then assign them to certain elements of the story in order for me to tell it. I couldn't just write and just go, I can make this up. You do, when you're writing, you get very creative, but it has to fit into a framework. Otherwise, I don't see how the reader can identify with it, and I want to bring it to a conclusion.
Everybody has their own description of the flow and the process. So they're moving about, and eventually you get synchronicity, if you've ever come across that term.
Yes.
Yeah.
And it is with this, and I was able, but by doing that, I was able to stay true to the plot, stay true to the twists that I'd created, but by the creativity that enabled me to throw in one final twist at the end, which I hadn't planned to do when I was writing the book. So that I found pleasurable, and it's similar to Revenge. When I wrote Revenge, I reached a point where I had to bring it back into itself and conclude. I could have carried on writing forever. I was enjoying it that much, but I didn't seem to be fair on a reader who wants to, reach a conclusion. So that's what I did.
Yeah, you give them. I've been told you give them a few plots, but you don't give them the whole story.
No.
And you mentioned your father. Do you have any other inspirations in your process?
Yes, my friends, my family, but kind of real life in the main is my inspiration, and I've got a pretty wild imagination, but and this quite wicked sense of humour. So I always see the funny side of things, which can be quite difficult for me sometimes if we're dealing with something quite tragic. I see a funny side, and I've got to be really careful not to put my foot in it. But I like to make people laugh, and to a small degree, I like to shock.
Yeah.
But I like to share those things that illuminate my life. if that, that's what I'd like to do. And I'm on social media day in, day out, sharing things that make me smile. And whether they make everybody smile, I don't know.
Yeah, sometimes reading through my story, I have a good laugh, and stuff that people don't pick up, I still have a good laugh. And I think every good story has to have a good laugh, even if it's tragic in the end. Do you have a favorite author or a particular book?
Currently, my favorite author is Lee Child, and I do like the Jack Reacher series as a character.
But
Frank
only
Herbert,
just reading book one.
Frank Herbert, who wrote the Dune series, he's probably the writer that got into my head the most, and I loved the theology of Dune. Loved the new movie and the way it's been made, but reading the books, the first 3 books in particular, I loved the theology and the expanse of the story. Absolutely tremendous.
I mean, there are things I wish he expanded on, and I wish there were controversial subjects that he had actually, at the time, he said he censored himself. The relationship between brother and sister. We know he only alludes to it, whereas in later in life, he confirmed that it did happen, and that's what strained the relationship.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of things missing from that book that we may never get, that's sitting in Brian's notes.
Yeah, I mean, and he did touch on kind of some elements of LGBT and bondage and things, but you're right, he kind of whispered over them rather than told the story.
Well, there's rape, incest, the LGBT stuff with the Baron.
The Baron in particular, with his
his own Paul's relationship with I forget the name. Stilgard was sexualized in his mind. He was attracted to Stilgard. I believe. What's his name? The warrior played by Jason Momoa.
No, I can't remember. I can't remember all the characters.
I'm trying to think of his name because he's one of the most important characters. But there's an allusion. That's alluded to. There was a homosexual relationship there, both with Paul and the son, which was
Paul
Atreides, and Paul's own regret, I think, was more about his relationship with his mother, which again alluded to was his first sexual experiences back in that his so-called sister is actually not his father's but his. There's a lot of things alluded to that, unfortunately, because it's all about the moral breakdown, and he was trying to avoid the morality of the time and the changes in the time where there were people speaking about taboos and saying, look, there are people doing these things. We have to confront it in our stories. Otherwise, it becomes, I suppose, a point of exploration for the next generation.
Yeah, it is. And I know I wrestled with some difficult subject areas in Revenge, and I've dealt with racism. I've dealt with some pretty difficult graphic scenes, because that's what happens in real life, and it's hard sometimes to convey that. So I've opted to cover it in a fast pace, so that as a reader you don't have to dwell too long on the brutality, but you're moving forward with there's an end game to this. How do we get to the end game?
Well, modern politics would have me, a Scotsman, told to hate you, the Englishman, whereas you're a Northerner. You know as much as I do that past doesn't exist anymore, but in the minds of too many it does. And I think that's where modern stories are tackling these difficult issues and saying, look, Paul Atreides, he regretted his treatment of his mother in his early years. He regretted his relationship with Valia and not telling her the truth. He regretted Stilgard. He regretted so many things. If we got that in more detail, I think we have a much richer story, but also probably 6 more volumes.
Probably. I mean, you just have to bear in mind the universe he created. and The Expanse,
Very
and,
rich,
and,
very
and
rich.
all of those things. You see, it kind of drew me in some ways to watching Expanse. I don't know if you've seen Expanse, the science fiction series. Really good. Really enjoyed it.
Draws on June. Star Wars draws on June. 40K Warhammer draws on June.
Yeah.
The Terminator series with the indestructible robot, which came from Westworld, which comes from Dune, with the ancient enemy, the concept of the ancient enemy, which we all should know. The ancient enemy is the people, creators of AI, not AI, the creators of AI. But I wanted to see that made. I would have loved to have seen that made into a book, The Ancient Enemy.
Who knows? Who knows if it never will? So
yes. Sorry to go on distraction. We're here to talk about your books, but June is such an inspiration. Anybody into science fiction who hasn't read June isn't into science fiction.
They need to read it for sure.
For sure, it's probably in the top 10, along with 1984, another British classic, and Animal Farm.
Yeah, great.
Now, what advice would you give to new writers?
Research. You do need to research. I mean, I did lots of research for my books. There are a number of military references in particular, both from kit I operated when I was in the Royal Navy, and then a kit I wanted to refer to in the two novels. And I needed to make sure that those pieces of hardware, their capabilities, I didn't I wasn't stingy on the detail, because there'll be somebody somewhere who reads those books who's operated that equipment, and if I have misunderstood or misrepresented something, they will be the first to complain. So I use that as an example.
There'll be a TO somewhere going, right, I'm going to find him and give him a slap around the ear.
And so on and so forth. So places I've been to, so even when I described them from my memory, I still needed to make sure that I captured the right things in my memoirs. And for the novel, it was to make sure that if I was referring to something, because if not, the tiniest error can turn readers off. So research, and plan. And I've already mentioned about my straw plan that I use.
Research plan, a very good strategy. Very good strategy. The point. A lot of people, start with 10 points.
Yeah.
Turn a 10 point into 10 chapters, and then elaborate. A lot of people just, it's a simple process.
Yeah, when I'm writing and I'm already reading ahead, so I know the straw plan, I know the framework, I'm writing ahead.
Yeah.
I realize I need to pick this thing up in a chapter that might be 2 or 3 chapters away. So when I'm writing, I quickly go forward to that point and drop in a couple of bullet points, and then come back. I don't stop writing. I don't stop writing to dwell on it, because you can lose your train of thought. And so for me, I would say, do your research, do your plan, but then be creative and write. Don't stop writing to clarify a single point. When you come in to do your first editing, and I employed a process of editing after I'd written each chapter, so I would go back and re-edit the chapter. Then I would look for consequences of things I'd written, and did I need to go back? Did I need to go forward to write those things down? But certainly, don't limit your creativity, but equally make sure that you research facts and points that you want to make, that you've got the accurate information. And then the other one for me, the critical factor, is editing. And edit. I chose not to use a professional editor for my memoirs, which is why I describe them as being raw and gritty, because I wrote them as I would tell the story. If I was having a beer with you in a pub, this is how I'd tell the story.
Yeah.
And that's how I wrote it.
Dedicated to the early days of the British pub, where that was your entire life, where that was entertainment. You went to hear stories, you got your main meal, you had probably your first drink of the day. It was half your life.
But I tried to write it from the memory of the person I was at that time, and how I was thinking and what I was doing.
Yeah, I understand that. That's
so in doing so, but I know that contains
Yeah.
grammatical errors, some spelling mistakes. But for the two novels, I know I needed that support, so I paid for a professional editor on both of those books. Both Revenge and Quest were professionally edited, and it was important for me to do that. And again, that's something I would stress to writers: is have your beta readers, have your proofreaders, what you will, but employ the services of a professional editor. It's worth its weight in gold.
Now, writing is a stressful process. A lot of people understand that. How do you deal with the stress of the process?
Well, I'll just take you back to 2018. In 2018, my brain went pop. Right. I had my blood pressure went off the scale, and caused me to develop something called global transient amnesia. I couldn't remember anything, so I couldn't make new memories in that period of time, and I couldn't remember anything from before that time. It lasted about 8 hours. I have no memory of it. That's the thing. And then gradually it came back, and it took about 6 months before I could remember a lot of things that I should have known: names of people, names of places, words. And to this day, I'm still quite, even 4 years on, I'm quite nervous sometimes when I start speaking that I might not remember what I want to say. That's how much it affected me. And that was caused by stress. There's workplace stress and social, recreational stress. So much going on in my life at that time.
Yeah, we have many levels of stress. Yes.
Yeah. And my neurologist said, essentially, your brain switched off like a fuse. So what do? I also had vertigo and migraine for 6 weeks. Not pleasant at all. So what do?
I get vertigo, and yeah, I know what that's like. You can't close your eyes. You need to sit in the dark. You can't move. Even twitching will set it off.
I wedged myself into a sofa with cushions, and that was my life for about 6 weeks. And
well, you can't move because people can't understand it. But if you ever get it, you're like, that's the only way to understand it, and you just don't want it.
No, I've had seasickness, and it's nothing like seasickness. It's worse. So I still honestly don't understand the connection between that mental health issue of stress and the physical. I took my line to get my fitness back. I love walking, hill walking. I wouldn't say mountain climbing, but I'll go up some big hills and walk a lot. So walking helps me. It helps me to clear my mind sometimes. And I can, whilst I'm walking with a dog, then my brain's working. And certainly when I'm writing, walking helps me to sometimes put some things into order, or I'm working through a particular scene and I want to say a certain thing. So when I'm walking, that helps a lot. And I also like to socialize. I like a drink with my friends and just chatting about everyday things.
Yeah. That's what I get into with Writer's Life in the Facebook chat groups. A lot of people say, and I actually posted the meme not long ago about being in the shower and boom, all these ideas come. That's what I'm talking to people about stress, is because I've been through stress, a breakdown through stress, anxiety, autism, which makes it difficult to learn new things, hard to socialize, vertigo caused by high blood pressure, sporadic amnesia. That's you don't even realize it's happening, where you think you're doing something and suddenly you find yourself hours have gone by. With no idea what you did.
Yeah.
And sometimes you'll wake up with new clothes.
Yeah. One of those things is, so at that time, I used to say yes. Somebody threw a challenge at me, I'd say, yeah, I can do that, not a problem. And I thought that, I honestly believed I was mentally indestructible. Well, I now know I'm not. And so one of the other ways of dealing with it is I just say no. Sorry, I can't do that. And
or not engaging people on controversial topics merely because they want the argument.
No, I try and avoid that. I really do. You know, life's too short for whimsical arguments on minor principles, or where somebody has taken misunderstood a fact or a statement and then turn it into an entire argument or a war. And I just go, bye. It's not for me. I don't need it.
also, you did mention you like walking. Is there anything else you do between writing that is inspirational to writing?
Yes.
Yeah.
So I volunteer with a number of ex-military charities, and one of them's called the Armed Forces and Veterans Breakfast Club, and essentially it's a movement that combats isolation and loneliness amongst the ex-forces community, and I find that quite rewarding. And some of that is literally as simple as getting somebody to come out and have a breakfast with us and come and have a cup of tea, egg and bacon, and a sit down and a chat, because they haven't got that through the rest of the week. And so it's inspirational for me, because I also then, as part of that engagement, get to hear their stories, and they give me ideas. And in fact, some of those ideas are in my straw plan at the moment for the story I'm going to be writing. And then another of the groups I work with is called Project Recce, and it's all about helping ex-service people transition from the military into civilian employment, but aimed purely at the construction industry.
That's amazing. I've always said my father was ex-ambulance, ex-rescue. He rescued people off the Australian coast when the Americans were testing their carriers out here, because we had much calmer waters, much shallow. So if they lost the plane, it was easy to recover. Whereas off the American coast, it goes in the water. That's it, boys. It's lost.
Yeah.
So he was rescuing planes, rescuing pilots, and the PTSD that built up in the pilots just it eventually worn off to the ambos, and so he was out, and then he got hit a few years later by a truck and broke his neck. This was before I was born. He had a broken neck for most of his life.
Okay.
And yeah. But one thing I did, I have a brother in the Navy, and he was a TO. And I busted my back while I was going through the process of induction for artillery.
Wow.
Had a keen mind at the time, and despite my shortcomings in my sight, the operation of artillery systems is, there's very few people with the qualifying mathematical minds for that complicated piece of equipment that people think is just a simple gun that points and shoots. And being in the Navy, you know about the complex that goes into the gunner who's sitting behind that.
Absolutely, whether it's a gun or a missile. Although I did fire 20mm Oerlikon, and that was less technical. And it was just about being strapped into a bouncing thing, firing 20mm rounds into the air. But it was a bit of fun, but shook you to bits.
Oh, absolutely. But without going into too much detail, the 105, the 125, and the 155 are all different operated equipment with their own little ballistic computer, and they all have manual backups and optical backups, and they have two gunners, not one. They have two loaders and a sighting officer. It is a very complicated piece of equipment that must be very taken care of. And during the process of going through the weightlifting and that, it just discovered that I had a depressed disc.
Yeah.
And that can lead to spinal fracture lifting a 2.5-ton piece of equipment, because the crew have to be able to lift the guns.
Yeah. I
did
when I was in the Navy, I did the junior field gun, which was quite fun. And I was a wheel number, and I had to lift the wheel that was weighed more than I did, and it was technique and as well as physical grunt about picking that wheel up and moving it.
Yeah, we had a log. We had to pick up logs. You start with the usual, your 3 meter, then your 4 meter, and then you got your 5 meter with about the weight of the barrel for the 155, and then you're doing the team movement. because you got to be able to not just lift the barrel, but screw it in and apply enough torque without the wrench, even though in real life you use the wrench. But, if that piece of equipment goes missing or you're in quite a hurry to unscrew it, you have to be able to screw it up and unscrew it. There's a lot that goes into that process.
There is, without a doubt. Cool.
And a lot of people just think the Army's about cleaning guns.
Or the Navy's just about floating around on the ocean.
That's right. You're skiing behind those. The Elizabeth's just out there with the crew skiing behind it.
Yeah. I don't think I ever skied.
Well, thank you for the conversation. It's been great talking to you. Any parting words for the audience before we close?
I mean, just to say, if you want some excitement and adventure, read my 2 novels, Quest and Revenge. If you want to know about my life, my ups and downs, and have a laugh with me over a beer, is read my 3 books of memoirs, which are called Born in Stockport, Brought Up in the Royal Navy, Grew Up in the Royal Navy. And I can be contacted on Twitter at Maurice Perkins, and feel free to engage with me. I'm here, happy to chat.
And I say to people on Remembrance Day, find a vet, give him some time.
Yeah.
Thank you for coming. And I ask people, please subscribe to the channel. Donations accepted. Links are in the description below. Revenge is in the description below. Just remember to click the author's name and click more books to see the rest of the books, because they're not in a series. They're 5 sets, I believe, although the first three are linked.
Yeah.
Thank you for coming, Moz, and I will sign off.
Thanks, David. You take care.
You too. Bye now.